Hello everyone, welcome to today's lesson on income. Right, so we're at the home stretch now. This is our last unit. Right, just on financial stuff to wrap up our school year or our semester. Okay, so there's a couple of ways to earn income. Right, very important stuff. The most common one you'll see is salary. Right, which is amount of money you pay over which is the amount of money you are paid over a fixed period of time. Generally, when people are talking about their salary, that's usually how much some people are earning in 1 year. And of course, it doesn't make sense to just be paid all the money all at once. Right? We can't really, budget for rent and stuff that easily if we just get paid all at once. So, what most places do is, well, actually not most, what all places do is that they split salary into small segments. And so instead of paying all the money at once, they pay over a certain period amount of time. So, for example, if it's being paid monthly, right, then we get paid 12 times. Oh, excuse me. Right, so monthly is just 12 times, right? Once a month. Semi-monthly, right? Semi just means half. Or rough meaning, it just kind of means half. Right? So which means that semi-monthly just means you're getting paid every half a month. Right? Which means that you're getting paid 2 times every month. So you get paid 24 times. Right? Or you can get paid every 2 weeks. Right? We know that, let's do weekly first. Right? We know that there are 52 weeks in a year. So being paid weekly means you're getting paid 52 times. So every 2 weeks, right? We can just divide that by 2. Means that we're getting paid we're getting paid 26 times. And so that's slightly different, right? A week is 7 days. Right? There's not just perfectly 28 days in a month, except for February on a non-leap year. Right? So I think this is the most common one. It's either one of those two, right? It's either twice a month or every 2 weeks. Right? So that's salary. Commission is when we get paid a certain percent of total sales. Right, this is very common in retail or car dealerships. Right, you get a percentage cut of the things you sell. Wage is probably the most common one, especially for high schoolers. Right, so this is when we work for an hourly rate of pay. Right, that's different than salary because for us teachers, we have an unpaid salary. It's not calculated by how many hours we work. It's just, here is what we expect you to come to school with. We work 6.5 hours. You can stay longer if you want to do photocopy and stuff, but that's just your salary. Whereas wage, if I work 10 hours, I get paid 10 hours of that. But anyways, it's usually 7 to 10 hours a day for around 35 to 40 hours a week. Now in BC, if you're working more than 40 hours a week, it's considered overtime pay. Now, if you work 41 hours, you get paid 40 hours of regular wage and 1 hour of overtime pay. And the overtime is usually 1.5 times the regular wage. But sometimes, if you're working on holidays, especially Christmas, it is 2 times the pay. Very fun stuff. But that means you're sacrificing a holiday, so kind of pick a poison, right? Piecework is getting paid a fixed piece rate. So a fixed amount for each unit produced. Right? And usually they are paid on top of a wage. Or not usually, but sometimes. I don't know how common it is. Okay, so let's try some calculations here. Let's say a worker here earns an annual salary of 42,600 paid every week. And her work hour is 40 hours. Right? So what's her pay? Gross pay just means kind of like the total pay. Right, we'll learn more about what gross actually means next lesson. Alright, so what's her pay every week? Right, so we know the annual salary. Annual means every year. So all we have to do is to divide that by 52, right? 52 weeks in a year. So she's gonna paid 800 a week. And what's her hourly rate? Right? We know that she works 40 hours every week. So we can just divide that further by 40 to get her hourly rate of 20.48 per hour, which as of recording is above minimum at British Columbia, which is fantastic. Good for her. Okay. And now let's say the overtime hourly rate is 1.5 times regular pay. Right? Which is pretty common. What does she make working 8 hours overtime in 1 week? Alright, so let's find out what the overtime pay is. We know the regular pay is 20.48. Overtime pay is 1.5 times. Right? So overtime, she gets paid 30.72. Right? So the total weekly is our 819.23. Right? That's her default regular pay. And if she's working 8 hours overtime, we have 8 hours, so 8 times the overtime pay, right? 8 times 30.72. Of course, remember our BandMass, we do this calculation first before adding it. So if she works some overtime, she gets a bit more than 1,000, which is fantastic. Okay, let's take a look at commission. All right, so Zelda here works at the Ancient Technology Research Lab. Her weekly base salary is 420. So again, this is weekly. Oh, my head's covering it. Right, so weekly is 420 plus 7.5% on weekly sales over 5,500. All right, so if she sells $5,000 worth of stuff, she doesn't get any commission bonus. But if she goes above the 5,500, then she gets a commission bonus. And let's say she had a good week, she sold $7,250 for the week. All right, so let's see what's her income. All right, so we know the commission is on anything over 5,500. And if she sold 7,250, we can just subtract them. All right, so she sold 1,750 over the weekly sales threshold. Right? And she gets paid 75% of anything above the 5,500. So 7.5% of this, which is multiplied by 0.075. Right, so her commission she earns is 131 bucks. Right, as a reminder, 7.5% is just 7.5 over 100 or divided by 100, right, which is 0.075. So her total, or the gross, is 420 in a week, plus what she's earning on her commission. All right, great stuff. Okay, let's check hourly. Again, very common. All right, so Mr. C used to work at Ukuman. Of course she did, right? Math tutoring place, of course I did that. A regular work week is 40 hours, and it was an hourly pay of 20.65. That must be nice. I think I got paid, $14 back then, but that was when the minimum wage was only 11 bucks. All right, so the hourly pay was 20.65, and time and a half for overtime, right? So 1.5 times. And let's say I worked 44.5 hours last week. What's the total amount of pay? All right, so let's find the overtime first. All right, so I worked 44.5 hours, and the standard is 40 hours. So 4.5 hours is overtime. Now let's see what the pay is. All right, so the wage is 20.65 regularly times 1.5 for the overtime pay, and I worked 4.5 hours. So the overtime is 139.39. Okay, so we just add that to the total. or the gross. So we have 40 hours worked at 1065. We add some overtime on top of that. Remember our bed mass. Okay, and that's how much I earn in a week. Right, so okay, this is the normal amount of hours. And this right here is overtime. Okay, last one is piecework. Right, so while producing a parka, of course we got to install a zipper. Right, an experienced seamstress needs 20 minutes on average to sew a zipper onto your parka. Right, and they're going to pay $6.20 for every zipper that they put on. Right, so what's her weekly pay if she works 35 hours a week? Okay, so assuming that she can do 20 minutes for the whole 35 hours in a week, right? We have to figure out how many zippers she can make. Then we can just multiply how many zippers she can make to the amount that she pays to find out how much she can earn. Okay, to find out how many zippers she can make, right, let's see how many minutes she's worked, right? Because it takes her 20 minutes and out of 35 hours. Right, so the minutes she worked every week, right, is we know 35 hours and we know 60 minutes in an hour, so just multiply that by 60. So she works 2,100 minutes. Right? If we remember all the way from our first unit, right, we can use conversion factors here as well, right? We know 1 hour is 60 minutes. Right, we can cancel out the hour units. Right? And then zippers per week. Let's say that's like a weird metric, zippers per week. Okay. And she can do 1 zipper in every 20 minutes. You can just divide that by 20, which is 105 zippers. Okay, so her total gross pay is 105 times getting paid $6.20 per zipper. So $651. Okay, there we go. Lastly, if Greg makes $225.75 each week, how much is he making a month? And if he wants to save 20% of his pay every week, how much money will he save in a year? Right, so let's find our first one. What's the weekly pay? Right, so, or not, sorry, not weekly, monthly. Right, so there are 4.3 weeks in a month, right? Because again, a month is 30 or 31 days, with the sessions of February. Right, so in a month you get around 970. Of course, you can just use 4 if you want. I'm not gonna be too stingy on that 4.3. 4 is fine. As long as it's 4, something around 4, right? Don't give me 3 weeks. Okay, so that's how much he makes in a month. And now let's find out his savings, right? So, he is saving 20% of what he makes every month, right? So 0.2. And we know there are 12 months in a year. So in total, if he keeps saving 20% each month, he will eventually save up 2,300 something. Right, so that's how you will do something like that as well. Okay, so that's pretty much it for today's lesson, no? Just kind of calculating the wages and the different ways you can earn money. Right, pretty useful stuff. But with that being said, that's all. So, good luck practicing.